Hello and welcome to episode 120 of Author's Afterword. On this podcast, I talk to an author about one, occasionally more, of their books in detail. And if you find yourself enjoying today's episode, do share it with your friends. So, I'm Charlie Place, and today I'm joined by Amy Engel. We'll be discussing her latest thriller, I Did It For You. It's a wonderfully written one, this one. Greer has returned to her small town following the murder of a young couple, which mirrored the murder of Greer's own sister Eliza and her boyfriend Travis years before. Greer had felt the need to return, and when she gets there, that feeling that something was missed in the original investigation comes back in full force. Eliza's killer was executed, but here the town is with the mirror image of another murder. So Greer determines to find out what really happened last time. The executed killer of Eliza definitely did it, but there was surely someone else behind it. Hello, Amy.
Hi.
It is lovely to have you here. I would love to start with the inspiration, the original thoughts that you had, that sort of thing with this novel.
You know, I usually start with two things, a place and a character. And so I set all my novels in the Midwest, generally in small towns, whether it's the Ozarks in Missouri or a small town in Kansas. And so I knew I wanted to set this one in a small town in Kansas. And then the character of Greer just sort of came to me, not fully formed, but just sort of an idea of this woman who has struggled with grief for more than a decade. Because I think grief is an emotion that most people in their lifetime will feel, and it's a universal thing that people struggle with and deal with in different ways. So I wanted to really explore that. And from that, those two things, I just sort of came up with the whole idea. I was a criminal defense attorney for many years, and I had death penalty cases. So I wanted to sort of pull in things that I experienced or learned from those cases. And just over time, the whole story came to me. But it definitely started with a place and just that singular character at the beginning.
Okay, so Greer's character then, the narrative voice of Greer in your book is the thing that just caught me straight away. I am a slow reader by nature. I often read with the voice in my head. It's generally my voice, I suppose you could say. Sometimes maybe the author. But from the word go with your book, I had a completely different voice. I had your Greer's voice, which I really appreciated. I loved it.
Well, that's amazing.
What you're saying also just sounds like you worked a lot on creating her and developing her character. Can you talk more about it?
Yeah, I definitely write character-driven books, I think, but I don't outline. So a lot of times the character, I have an idea of them. I mean, in my head, as I'm writing, they are an actual living, breathing person. But as I'm writing, they become more and more fully formed. So I don't tend to go into it knowing everything about the character before I start writing. I like the story to sort of help me build this person as I go along. I feel like if I outline or do too much ahead of time, then I'm sort of bored as I'm writing. So I like the story to come to life, and that helps me flesh out the character. But it's interesting you said that about Greer, because she was very loud in my head from the very beginning. She had a very distinct voice and a very specific way of talking and dealing with her emotions or not dealing with her emotions. And sometimes the choices that she made, I would think, wow, that's not something that I would ever do or say, but she was very present in my head. And so she was easy to write.
Okay, wow, yeah, I can see why she is so on the page. You have let her take the story and go where it needs to go. Yeah, no, I did find it fascinating because you've said this is a character-driven novel. It absolutely is. But there's also almost like a literary sense in it, I think, that kind of goes into that as well. And yeah, Greer's language is just so realistic. This book could make a really good movie, I think. I can kind of see it in my head all while I'm reading
it.
Going back to what you said about location, the small town, I'm not from America, obviously, my accent shows I'm not, and I haven't been there, but is Ludlow itself, I couldn't find it online, is it fictional? Can you tell us how you created location, etc.?
Yeah, it is fictional. My mother was born and raised in a really small town in Kansas, and my great grandparents lived there until they died when I was in college. So I visited small town Kansas often growing up. And so I feel like I have a good sense of a lot of these small Midwestern towns, and a lot of them are slowly dying as people move away and the industries fade away that used to keep these towns going. And it's sad to see these once sort of prosperous little towns just kind of crumbling. And there are some, of course, there's exceptions. There's some that have managed to even grow or keep their populations, but a lot of them haven't. And so that was one thing that I know pretty well. And I wanted to bring the town almost as its own character to the page.
It certainly comes across that way. And then you filled it with so many people. I mean, in many ways, it felt to me while reading it, I suppose because I was so engrossed in what was happening in your characters, that I knew everybody in the town. And I don't think that's correct. I don't think we know everybody. But you just have so many people so well drawn, no matter if they're there for 2 seconds or there for a longer period. Can you tell us about just creating the wider population of the town?
I mean, I think a lot of it comes from I'm an only child and I've always been an introvert. And so I spend a lot of time observing people, the way they talk or the way they walk, the way they interact with each other. And so I think I bring all of that when I'm creating these secondary characters. And I really do try, even like you said, if they're only there for one scene, to make them distinct so that they stand out with their own personalities or their own inflections when they speak or whatever it might be, just so that it feels to the reader more immersive when you're reading about this town and these people. And as I'm writing, I can picture it in my head almost like a movie. And so I want to bring that same sense to the reader if I can. So yeah, even if like someone is only there for a scene and they're not going to be important later on, I still want the reader to be able to visualize them and have that character speak to them, even if it's just for that one scene.
I suppose then they can also be added to the red herrings if needed later as
Yes,
well.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's really interesting. And you say about, yeah, letting Greer kind of, she's gone where she needs to go, you let her tell the story, and it sounds very much like you're kind of writing this as a reader yourself, which is very interesting.
Yes.
And I suppose I want to ask more about like secrets and revelations. When you're writing, when do they occur to you? Do they literally occur to you and you write them down then, or do you have some sort of planning with that?
When I start out, I know how the book's going to begin, and I generally have an idea of how it's going to end. And some of the revelations, I know I sort of have an idea about them and where they might show up, but other times things are kind of a surprise to even me as I'm writing. I'll think, "Oh, that would work here," or "Oh, this is why this happened," which I know sounds strange for somebody who writes like mysteries or thrillers to not have that all plotted out exactly. But like I said before with the character, if I plot too much ahead of time, then it takes the excitement or the joy out of writing it for me. Almost like a reader, like you said, I like to discover the story as I'm writing it. So I do have some sort of idea, but I don't have a specific like, oh, in chapter 5, this is going to be revealed, or in chapter 7, we're going to find out this person did this. I don't have anything that specific at all, but I might have an idea like this character did this one thing, but I don't know when that's going to come up or how that's going to be revealed necessarily.
That's all very natural then, all very naturally comes out. And
Yes.
this is a very interesting interpretation of death of the author or not death of the author. It's really, really interesting talking to you about this. Greer is, I wasn't sure whether to call her an unreliable narrator to begin with
Yeah.
or not. And I really wanted to trust her because she's a really great character overall. How was it writing her in this sense? Did she feel unreliable to you at a time, etc.?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess in the technical term, she is probably, yes, an unreliable narrator, at least partially. But I feel like a lot of times with unreliable narrators, they are lying and they know they're lying and they are lying for a specific purpose. And with Greer, she is more withholding. And I know that's probably a technicality and wouldn't hold up in court, but she's withholding not only from everyone else, but also from herself. There's things she just doesn't know how to face yet and doesn't know how to admit or talk about or confront. And so for years, she has sort of hidden them. And she knows they're there. It's not like she has amnesia or something, but she just doesn't know how to process some things that she did or that happened to her when she was young. And so she's sort of carved out this life where she just has this whole part of herself that is a secret from everyone, including herself. And that's caused damage to her relationships, to her family. And I think Greer's smart enough to know on some level that at some point she's going to have to face those things, but she just hasn't been ready up until this point.
Yeah, definitely. You could tell that she was hiding, and also there definitely seemed to be something in her subconscious all the time as well,
Yes.
which was interesting with that. On a completely different topic, well, the book still, but still, you have Greer as the vast majority of the narrative, and then you've got passages from, I think I've noted down, to Liza, it's Travis, Dylan, Addie, and Roy. Can you
Right.
talk about adding those in to the narrative?
I didn't have those in my first draft. And when I read back through the book, I just felt like there was something missing. And I wanted to hear from the characters who are so important to the story, but who are dead. And I didn't want it to be like she goes to talk to someone and they tell her a story about this person and then about this person and then about this person. I wanted the readers to sort of connect with these people in a way that felt more immediate even though they're gone. And so I thought, well, I could just do short little chapters from each of them at various points in their life. It doesn't necessarily have to be right before they die or have something to do with the murders necessarily. And so that's how those passages came about. I wrote those after I finished the first draft, and I was really happy with them. I felt like they added a lot to the story.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, definitely. I mean, it's interesting that you've got them and then they, pardon the pun, it brings them alive more.
Right.
And I thought certainly with Roy, I mean, I want to ask you about Roy actually, definitely, because I wondered, maybe I'm bringing too much of my own thoughts into it. He seemed to have some neurodivergence. He seemed to be a bit
Yes.
different. Was this an important thing for you to look at, etc.?
I honestly, I wish I had notes from because I'm not sure how that came to mind initially. But yeah, I feel like it did become an important part of the story. He was different than other people. And a lot of times, especially in small towns, different isn't always good. So he was sort of isolated. He only really had his brother. And I feel like in some ways that made it easier for people to just assume. I mean, he did do it, but for people to not care that there wasn't a why. I feel like Greer was the only one who was so stuck on why. Why did he do it? It didn't make any sense. And other people were just content to say, well, he did it probably because he was different or neurodivergent or whether he was who knows what the exact diagnosis would be. But I think it felt easier for people to dismiss him because of that. And it was harder for him to make connections with people. So the connections that he did make were very important to him and sort of became his whole world. And that was important to the story.
Was it important to you to show the good in him as well, in particular?
Yes. Yeah. And that I think comes from my criminal defense background because I represented a lot of people who had done really terrible things. But I can honestly say not one of them was a terrible person, like a completely terrible person. I mean, there's obviously exceptions. There's, people who are just complete psychopaths out there. But the people that I represented were more regular people who had, for whatever reason, made a horrible choice at one point in their life, but they weren't just throwaway people. They all had something, some good quality, whether it was a child they loved or a parent or somebody they helped a fellow inmate in prison and I just think it's important. It's more complicated and probably requires more of us to see the good in people who have done something horrible. But I think it's important for society and for us as human beings and our empathy. It doesn't mean that they should, not have to be punished for what they did or anything like that, but just to recognize that just because someone has done something terrible doesn't mean that they're not worthy of any sort of human empathy or understanding or love, even. So that was something I wanted to put into the book for sure.
I know I was reading and I found it really, well, I'm going to use the word interesting again. That does it. That covers it. You don't have, for example, a question of whether Roy did it or not. That was something I wondered if you were going to include. And then you are very firm in that, no, he literally did it. There might be other surrounding circumstances, but he did. Did you ever consider having it that Roy hadn't done it?
No, no, I always knew that he had done it. And I think part of it was for the plot, but also, like I said, there's that up until the point where you read his point of view, it's pretty easy to dismiss him as just this killer with no redeeming qualities who, hurt his family, who killed Eliza and Travis. And then you read his section and those things may all be true, but there's also other things that are true about him. And I don't ever want to be preachy in my books and hit readers over the head. The thing I want most is for them to be immersed in the story and entertained. But if I can sort of put things in there that maybe cause them to think a little differently about a subject or about a type of person, then that's a win for me. And I feel like that's sort of who Roy was. He's somebody that hopefully causes the readers to take a step back and think about him as more than a one-dimensional person.
Yeah, I know I certainly was reading it, and while you set out the reasons and it's entirely understandable that his life goes as it does, there was a part of me that was definitely like, I wish more of the conversation that was had between Greer and Dean could have just been had when Roy was still alive, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Which in itself is something interesting to contemplate, I think, as a reader.
Yeah.
Kind of on this, you have quite a look at grief and the different ways that people grieve. Again, I suppose I want to say, can you talk about this, the importance of it and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I knew going in that, one of the big themes of the book would be grief and the ways in which people handle it or don't handle it. And I think as a society, we're uncomfortable with grief a lot of times. And we want people to get over it or get past it or talking about it or whatever it might be. And I think all of those, the reactions, everything is just taken up about 10 notches when you have a violent death like Eliza. And so with Greer's family, with Greer and her parents, I wanted to look at three different ways that this family, they all experienced the same loss, but they all three had such different reactions to the grief. But the one common denominator is they're all stuck where they were at the time that Eliza died and what it would take to maybe help them not get over it, but move forward from it. So that was sort of my thought going in.
Yeah, no, because you do have, to use a quick explanation, quick summary or whatever, you have very different extreme versions where Greer's family has just completely lost their interest in life or whatever, or are doing things repeatedly over and over. You've got drunk father, you've got the mum who cleans a lot, and then you've got the other parents who are still getting on with life, which was an interesting balance to contemplate, I think.
Yes. Yeah. And I wanted to show, I don't think there's a wrong or right way to grieve, but definitely Greer's parents probably have an unhealthy relationship with grief and just can't move past it. And so I wanted to show at the end that at least there's some hope potentially for them to maybe be able to have some happiness moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Dean,
Yes.
the kind of the controversial friendship.
Yeah.
Tell us about including that.
I didn't know. I wasn't sure when I started writing, like just the first few chapters, Dean was just sort of a glimmer in my mind. I wasn't even sure I was going to go that route. But then I started writing him, and he was just kind of like Greer. He just sort of came alive on the page. And so he became a bigger part of the book, maybe, than I initially had thought. And he came from, I had a death penalty case, and the family of the defendant. That was probably the first time that it really hit home for me that obviously the victim's family oftentimes is destroyed by a murder, but the murderer's family is also often destroyed, but nobody cares because it was their child or father or whoever that committed the murder. And there's, of course, cases where the family is just as horrible as the person who committed the murder, but a lot of times they had nothing to do with it. They thought they raised their child or whoever the best they could. Then this happens and they're sort of painted with the same brush as the murderer. And they love this person who committed this murder, but at the same time, they have all this shame and guilt and anger and sadness. And like I said, nobody really cares. And so I really wanted Dean to be able to express that. And he has all this guilt for what his brother did and feels terrible for Greer's family. But at the same time, he has like this anger about the way he's been treated and his grandmother's been treated. He has anger at his brother, who is dead now. You know, it's a very complicated mess of emotions. And I wanted to bring that out.
You've got this, and then, yeah, you put it together with how you show the goodness in a bad person. You're really humanizing it and bringing a reality to the situation and getting people to consider it all.
That's always, like I said before, really important to me. I rarely see things in black and white. To me, most things are sort of gray. And it's a more difficult way to look at the world. It's not as easy as just saying, oh, they're bad, they're good, they're right, they're wrong. But I feel like it's a more helpful way to look at the world. Like if we could all just take a breath and try not to put people in such rigid categories or boxes, you know, it's more difficult, but I feel like it's more rewarding and it might result in a more empathetic society. So, yeah, I definitely put that into my writing.
Yeah, no, sure, sure. I want to ask, you've told us, I think, 2 or 3 ways. Can you tell us further about how your career in law has affected your writing?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the main thing is I just have a hard time seeing anyone as purely good or purely evil. And I think, given the right set of circumstances, almost any of us could do something terrible. That sounds awful, but it's just what I saw. And so I feel like it gives me a broader lens for looking at characters. It allows me to sort of dive into both the good and the bad in each individual character and not shy away from it. And I think it's given me, I don't know, just a view of the world that's probably a little more understanding of the things that people do. Not to say, like I said before, that I think people should just go off and not be punished for what they did or not have to serve time or not face consequences, but just and understanding that sometimes people do things that are terrible and we can still look at them and find some humanity there, whatever it might be, and use that to sort of help us see the world in a more, I don't know, I keep using the word empathy, but, you know, have a little more empathy for each other and for the circumstances that people find themselves in.
No, I'm really happy that you've brought your career into it, and then, yeah, I've asked you and you've given us further, because there's a special kind of uniqueness where your books are just so well-rounded. And I think, yeah, some of that has to have come from a lot of it has come from your experiences, which is interesting to know about, yeah.
I think so. I think, yeah, I haven't written like a courtroom thriller or something that's necessarily legal, but I think all those experiences go into everything that I write for sure.
Yeah. You have taken, I would say, and I think it's down to also because you've got a character-driven novel, so everything's a little bit slower in that you haven't got like kind of boom, 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 everything being shown here. You let it unravel really nicely. You give us moments to just sit in and enjoy the location, enjoy the characters, enjoy what you've created. I suppose I want to ask you about writing in that way, your choices here, and why you decided to do it in this particular way?
It's funny because a lot of times I think with publishing they put books in categories like thriller, mystery, and so a lot of times my books are put in the thriller category, but I don't think of them as thrillers so much. Like when I think thrillers, I think like James Patterson, a book where like something crazy is happening on every page, and mine are definitely more character driven. I think of them just more as like psychological suspense or something like that, where it sort of does take its time unfolding and you really dive deep into the characters and know them so that when things happen to them, you feel it as a reader. And that's always what I'm going for when I'm writing. I try, like, there's that famous quote, I don't remember who it is, Elmore Leonard, maybe, who said, like, you skip the parts or take out the parts that people skip when they're reading. So I try not to go like, have like a page long description of something. I try to get the reader to feel or see the town without going page after page in description, but I also don't want to rush through conversations or things that people like sort of internal monologues of the characters. So it's always finding a balance between that because I definitely don't want readers to be bored, but I also want to give them enough so that they're really immersed in the story and the characters. So I don't necessarily think about it so much when I'm writing, but when I'm editing, I go back and make sure that I'm not belaboring anything. Although generally I have to add in editing versus taking out. I tend to be a pretty sparse writer, and then I go back and add where I need to.
I kind of want to ask, can you expand on what you add? What's been added to this book in that context?
Well, like I said, all the parts from the dead characters were added. I added some descriptions of certain parts of the town. I think my editor wanted me to expand on certain things. What did I add? Oh, at the beginning where there's the vigil in the park, that was all added in a second draft. So there have been some added scenes, like just to sort of beef up the character interactions or certain points in the plot. But that's usually once my editor gets a hold of it and says like, "Oh, I need to know more about this person or I need to know more about the relationship between these two people," and I'll find spots to add in a scene or to beef up a scene.
Fascinating. I'm always asking people, what did you cut out then? So,
Yeah, no, I rarely have to cut anything. I usually have to add.
interesting. I don't think I've asked this one. I was just wondering about this particular point where you haven't pushed the red herrings too hard. And I know that I completely was flabbergasted by who the person was. Didn't even occur to me to think about them being what's the word? The criminal, basically, that person.
Yeah.
You haven't done this. It's kind of with what I've been saying just a minute ago. It's very open for the reader to wonder about. You let us really think. You've got so many people that we really think it could be them. And then you've got someone who's entirely different to be that. What was your thought process coming up with this or when it happened, that sort of thing?
I think I knew from the beginning who had done it. And part of that was also informed by my work as a criminal defense attorney, because there's a part at the end of the book where, after it's revealed who did it and why, where Greer is thinking, like, it was such a stupid thing, like all these lives lost over something so small and ridiculous. And that was my experience as a criminal defense attorney. It was rare that there was a murder for some grand reason or some big master plan that made sense. It was generally some split second decision that in retrospect was so ridiculous. And it just snowballed into something huge. And I think that's often the case with crimes. We want to think like every criminal has, like we see on TV, has this grand plan and it all makes sense and it's for something big, for some big reason. And more often than not, it's not. That's what almost makes it more heartbreaking. It's something that so easily could have been avoided, but it just oftentimes isn't avoided, and people let their emotions get the best of them, and then something happens, and then to cover it up something else happens, and looking back you just think, really, that's why this person died? And so I wanted to bring that to the story. And I understand that that may be controversial for some people. Like, I think some people want the reason to be something they could understand more, or that it's something that they would kill for, or you know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's just, and the fact that the killer was young, or I guess he wasn't young when he killed, but when he had the idea. And I think sometimes we forget as teenagers how big the emotions can be and how it's hard to see. You know, as an adult, you can look back and say, well, it'll be okay. It's not that big of a deal. But as a teenager, emotions feel so big and things feel so life and death. And you oftentimes think, you know, if this one thing happens, my whole life is ruined, which we as adults know is not the case. But when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, it's sometimes hard to have that perspective. So I wanted to bring that to the story as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you do leave it kind of on that we understand it literally because we're being told why he did it. And then at the same time, yes, it's complicated, it's confusing. Greer isn't quite, she doesn't quite get it because, it's
Right.
very strange and stuff. But also, I don't know, there's kind of a realism in it, I think, in kind of what you're saying, in that it's not a big grand thing, which makes it feel a lot more realistic, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back, because I'm trying to think of when I found out about it, where you get to the part of the book where you find out about it for sure. And I'm thinking, I remember about the bit about the mum saying Ryan needed someone. Saying I went back and reread this, because I would like to, am I going to see a lot more here that's going to make me go, that's what she was doing?
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
I did try to weave things in, like when Greer goes to help his mom clean out the house, and she talks about how when his dad left, he said, "You're the man of the house now. You need to take care of your mom." And he's always sort of caretaking with Greer and Cassie, like making sure they're okay and being overly protective or worried about them, which he kind of hides behind his happy-go-lucky persona. But there's definitely that sort of over zealous protectiveness in him. And I mean, clearly he's got some stuff going on in his head that's not not normal. But, I think when it started as a teenager, in his mind, that was the best solution he could come up with to what he thought was this thing that was going to ruin his life. That to me holds true with the younger people that I represented in court. Oftentimes, something that as an adult, I would think, oh my gosh, this could have been solved 100 other ways rather than pulling a gun or whatever the case may be. But when you're that age, and that's why like we don't have the death penalty for 16-year-olds, because they oftentimes just cannot process things the way that adults can. Their brains just aren't able to do that yet. So that definitely played into the story. Like she said, when she talks to Cassie at the end, like, how did we not see it? Like, because we loved him and because we didn't want to. Like, a lot of times with friends or family, there might be behaviors that to the outside person would be a red flag. But because you're in it and you love them, you make excuses or you dismiss it or you just say, oh, that's Ryan. That's just how he is, because you're not seeing it as an outsider. You're not seeing the bigger picture.
That's a very good point. Yes. You aren't seeing it. You're seeing in that special little kind of a bubble almost. Yeah. Greer and Dean's romance not happening. I suppose I want to ask you about your choices there, because I thought I didn't feel either way. I didn't think like, oh, I wish they had carried on together. And I didn't think, oh no, they can't be together. I suppose I literally just want to ask you about your decisions and your choices here, about including their romance and then kind of ending it before it had begun, sort of thing.
I went back and forth on whether there would even be a romantic element, but as I wrote them, it just felt like if I didn't, it would be a lie. I felt like they, as characters, would sort of have that connection that way, just the way they interacted. And because they have this shared experience, it's not exactly the same. there's that line that they have different wounds, but they were made by the same weapon. They have that shared experience, and they've both been so isolated for so long that I felt like as they got to be closer friends, that something would develop. But I also knew that it would not be a forever type of romance just because of what has happened in the past. There's just really no way for them to work around that in a healthy way, I didn't feel like. But they each gave each other something that hopefully then they can move forward in life as better, more healthy, healed people, is my hope for both of them. It did sort of break my heart when they at the end, but it also felt like the only realistic or natural way for that relationship to evolve, that they had to sort of go their separate ways and wish the best for each other.
I thought it was interesting because, of course, it seems like first you've killed Dean. Your writer has killed Dean, Ryan's killed Dean, and then you bring him back. So it was just really interesting to see that then they don't get together at the end. You know, it's not all sunshine and roses, the kind of typical thing. You've gone for something different. Yeah.
I think I even tried to write a scene where they ended up together and it just didn't work at all. And that's how I always know when I'm on the wrong track. If I just can't get the words out on the page, then I know that's my subconscious saying, "Oh, you've made a wrong turn here. Let's backtrack." So it just felt better for the book, for them, for the story, for it to end the way that it did.
You mentioned about them like going their separate ways. Do you have any thoughts or, I suppose, hopes of what they would do in the future, both separately? You know, where they're going to go? I suppose particularly Greer, because she might go to Chicago again. We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my hope for Greer is that she figures out who she is independent of this tragedy that happened to her. Because I feel like ever since Eliza died and her guilt about all of it, she's sort of been stuck in kind of a suspended animation and trying to live her life in the way that Eliza would have, but also in a way that she doesn't ever have to like face what happened. And so my hope is that she figures out, like Cassie said, what she likes, what she wants out of her future, and that she's able to come home and see her parents and come to Ludlow without all of this guilt. And there'll always be pain, of course, and grieving, but in a way that allows her to move forward and really find her own voice and place in the world.
I'm really invested in her parents. Do you think that there would be a way for them now that they've got answers to, I suppose, be happy and work things through?
I mean, I feel like there's more hope for her mom. I think by the end, her mom is trying to like make baby steps to sort of move forward. And I think a big part of her mom's grief was not only losing Eliza, but losing Greer.
Yeah.
And so now that Greer is able to sort of open up and is more open to coming home and actually talking to her mom, I think that their relationship healing will help Greer's mom heal as well. Now, her dad with the alcoholism, I think that's more difficult. My hope is that, of course, that he could get help and do better with that. But that one is trickier for me. I'm not sure if her dad will be able to beat that or not, but I do have more hope for her mom.
Yeah, I know it can't happen at all. I really wanted them to be able to get the shop back. But
Oh, I know. I know. And that was that grocery store. My great grandparents had a grocery store in the little town where my mom grew up. And so it was based on that grocery store, which is no longer there, but it was a huge part of my mom's childhood.
okay, that's why it reads so well then. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to ask you what you're writing now, what's next, etc.
Well, actually, I took a little break from the dark stuff. This is a total change for me, but I wrote a romance novel.
Right.
Don't know if it will ever see the light of day, if it will ever be published, but I just needed a little palate cleanser. I was like, ooh, this one was dark for me, and I needed just a little break from that. So I did that, and now I am brainstorming my next dark book, but I haven't landed on anything 100% yet. So I'm hoping in the new year to really get going. It doesn't take me that long to write a book. For me, the coming up with the idea takes longer usually. I have to sort of go over a bunch of different ideas. I know a lot of people have like a notebook with ideas, and as soon as they finish one book, they just pull out their notebook and pick an idea, but I am not like that. It takes me a lot longer to come up with the idea than it does to write it generally.
All right. So do you have lots of ideas for things you might write one day, or do you usually just have
No.
one and then right,
No,
wow,
I
okay.
don't. It usually, the book before this, The Familiar Dark, there was a murder here in the Midwest that I saw on the news, and that's what sparked the idea for that book. But I didn't have an idea before that. So a lot of times it'll be just something random that I'll read or see or hear, or like sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night with a little spark of an idea, but I don't have a big catalog of ideas. And so I think that's why it takes me a little longer.
Okay. Maybe focusing on the one idea is how it's so successful in this way. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes I wish the ideas would come faster, but I can't force them. They come when they come.
Yes, I can relate to that somewhat with not a writer, but I write a blog, so sometimes I'm like, I need
Oh,
some more
yeah.
ideas. So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I'm going to keep a lookout for that possible romance book if you ever publish it, because I think that would be fascinating to see. I mean, okay, yeah, I don't know too much about your previous books, but having read the possibility of a romance in this one, I'd love to see how you've done it with like happiness and
Yeah. Well, maybe a little, it's not dark, but it's probably a little heavier than some romances, although it does have a happy ending. But yeah. So we'll see.
Amy, this has been absolutely lovely having you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Do join me next time. And if you have a moment to spare, please do leave a rating and/or review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Podcast Addict. Thank you. Authors Afterword episode 120 was recorded on the 17th of December 2024 and published on the 28th of April 2025. Music and production by Charlie Place.